Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session in the 2021 webinar series of the MIT Arab Alumni Association. My name is Hazem Zureiqat, and I am an advisor to the board and former president of the MIT AAA. I will be moderating this panel. The MIT Arab Alumni Association is an affinity alumni group established in the 1990s. It aims to build bridges between MIT and the Arab world through events, programs, and partnerships. Prior to COVID-19, our flagship event was the MIT Pan-Arab Conference, of which we held 8 across the region. We've also established the first endowed scholarship fund at MIT to support undergraduate students from the Arab world and those of Arab descent. We began organizing these webinars last year. We held, I think, about 7 events covering a variety of topics, but primarily focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, we are kicking off a series that covers a broader range of issues, starting, of course, with this first event on new mobility innovations in transportation. As our societies become more urbanized and our cities more congested, challenges related to transportation and mobility, our ability to move around, have become more pronounced and more complex. These challenges manifest themselves economically through the lack of access to jobs and education, delays and lost time due to traffic congestion and so on, and environmentally through increased emissions and higher energy bills. And households in our region and across the world continue to feel the pinch as the cost of owning a car and getting around continue to rise. But as the problem becomes more complex, work on developing solutions has also accelerated in many places, and those solutions have become more innovative. We're seeing AI-powered solutions to better manage traffic flow. Ride-sharing technologies and ride-hailing have disrupted the entire transportation industry over the past decade. And what were once viewed as more conventional public transport services have even evolved and adopted new technologies and modes of operation. And we often hear that the future of mobility is autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. These solutions have also brought in a whole host of issues related to policy, labor rights, and so on. And the COVID-19 pandemic has also presented some new challenges and opportunities in that regard. The pandemic has accelerated the adoption of tech and highlighted issues related to adaptability, to resilience, and to social protection in places where transport is heavily reliant on fragmented informal service providers. Since this is an MIT event, I also should mention that MIT has also been at the forefront of developing and working on these solutions. The Institute recently brought together all the transport-related work and research that's being done across different departments under one umbrella called the MIT Mobility Initiative. I encourage you all to look up the Mobility Initiative and check out some of the work that they're doing. Today, we are honored to have with us 3 distinguished guests. Please allow me to introduce them very quickly before we start our discussion. I won't read the whole bio. You can read those in our announcement, but I'll read a shorter version of the bio. Dr. Ayman Smadi is the MENA Director at the International Association of Public Transport, UITP, and the Director of the MENA Center for Transport Excellence in Dubai. Prior to joining UITP, Ayman acted as the Executive Director of Transport and Traffic Management at the Greater Amman Municipality, where he was also my boss, actually. And he was directly responsible there for the development and implementation of transportation policies and programs in Amman. Ayman holds a PhD in transportation engineering from Iowa State University. Joanne Kubba is the Senior Director of Public Policy for Uber, covering Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Her focus at Uber is to work with key governments and regulators to help define the right parameters for Uber to operate while showing the impact that the company can make at delivering economic opportunities and investments into the region. In her career, Joanne has focused on startups, entrepreneurship, and strategic partnerships across government and business. And prior to Uber, she was at Eureka, a global crowd investing platform, and also at Google as the head of public affairs for the Middle East and North Africa. Joanne completed her Master's of Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School in 2007. Dr. George Aoude is the CEO and co-founder of Derq, an award-winning MIT spinoff with a mission to eliminate road accidents and save lives. Derq has been recognized globally and was selected for the Techstars Mobility Program in 2017 and won the prestigious South by Southwest AI Prize in 2019 and the 2020 Together for Safer Roads program for Vision Zero. Dr. Aoude holds a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT, and his expertise includes autonomous and connected technologies and intelligent transportation systems. So we'll be doing a couple of rounds of questions with the speakers before opening up the floor for audience questions. For our audience, please make sure you type your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screens. The chat feature is enabled, so please use the Q&A box. I want to start with Ayman. Ayman, given your role at UITP and your wide membership base of transport authorities and leaders in the region, you have visibility on the state of at least public transport in the MENA region. Can you give us a sense of where we are today? What's the state of public transport in MENA, and what are the key patterns and trends that you're seeing?
Thank you very much, Hazem. Good evening and good morning, I think, for some of our colleagues in the US. Pleasure to be here. Quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with the International Association for Public Transport, we're probably one of the oldest and largest organizations that deal with urban mobility. We're about 135 years old. Started as an advocacy group in Europe and expanded to be a global organization. And of course, for the Middle East and North Africa, as Hazem mentioned, we have a wide membership base. We pride ourselves on having the full supply chain, if you will, of urban mobility. And so if I start at the global level, perhaps, there were 4 distinct trends that we call them future trends. This is prior to the pandemic, of course, that included at the very heart of it is digitalization. All the different services and technologies that disrupted and began actually, shaping the future of mobility, if you will. In MENA, it's sort of similar, but maybe due to the diversity of the region, it varies from one country to the other. But we have maybe 3 distinct geographical areas within MENA. We have the GCC. I'm located in Dubai, and Dubai by itself probably is a case of its own. And then we have sort of like the heart of the Middle East, I would say, like Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, of course, Syria, Iraq. And then you have the Maghreb region with Morocco probably leading on sustainable mobility. And so what we have seen over the last few years is really acceleration of the transformation towards sustainable mobility. I think it's very evident in cities that traditionally were so car oriented. If I take Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, as an example, where it is a typical actually US layout in terms of a grid network, lots of roads, lots of highways, lots of cars. And they figured that this is not working, and they embarked on one of the largest public transport projects in the world, which is the Riyadh Metro, BRT, bus network, etc. So we see a full transformation of a city that was so car-oriented, and this trend is repeated, with varying degree of success, but almost in every country in the region. We saw development of strategic plans that promoted sustainable urban transport. We saw attempts and some projects that succeeded in delivering mass transit systems. Hazem mentioned the word informality. I think this is quite key for the region, which I would like to link later to innovation and technology, because there's been a lot in terms of how do we reshape the industry by having, in a city like Cairo, for instance, you have more than 110,000, 120,000 microbuses that provide very essential services, but they are very likely regulated, in terms of level of service, in terms of safety standard, etc. It's a huge challenge. And then when you try to implement projects, what does that mean? So we view technology as one catalyst where you can actually, make a change without having a top-down approach. What we also see in the region is the embracing the technology. And I think part of this is having such a young population. Part of it is the reality of doing business in the industry and having new players, not so new anymore, like Joanne, Uber and Kareem and the likes. And actually creating an argument for technology where we have proof how we can optimize resources, how we can improve services, and also make a change, like in the yellow taxi, for instance, sector. What we also see is in GCC especially is Dubai as an example is leading on the, I guess, very futuristic concepts such as flying taxi, autonomous vehicles, etc. And so you have a mix within the region where we see a lot of innovation and technology. And I think, you mentioned policy and governance, and I think this is probably one key component in the region that probably did not keep up with the changing dynamics of mobility and maybe welcoming some of the new players. I will keep my remarks short for this bit, and maybe we can speak more in the second round. Thank you, Hazem.
Thank you, Ayman. No, and I'm going to start where you ended because it's a good segue to Joanne as the head of policy. Joanne, as I mentioned in the intro, companies like Uber have disrupted the transport landscape globally. Can you talk about your perspective on that, and maybe touch on some of the work you're doing in our region and some of the public policy issues that you face given your role in this?
Sure, happy to. I'll just share a few slides just to give some context. I'm not as eloquent as Dr. Ayman, so hopefully I need some slides to guide me through. Do you see that okay? Hazem, it's fine? Yeah, good, great.
Yeah, it's fine.
Wonderful. So, I mean, for some of you might have already seen many of these slides, but I just thought it would be useful to laser up kind of as, I've been at the company now just over 6.5 years. And it's been such an interesting time to actually see where we started, which was, a basic mission of trying to move at that time, just people from A to B, and what that's changed to. And now really our mission is to create opportunity through movement. So we started in 2010. It was quite a simple problem. How do you get a ride at the touch of a button? And it's interesting. I recently tried a new product, and it was like the first time I'd ever my first Uber trip kind of flashed back to me. And it's this kind of incredible moment in which you say, oh, is this how technology can actually take something that was just such a part of my everyday life and turn it into something quite as a magical experience? Now, I'm sure as many of you might have experienced, the Uber story has really transformed over the years. So we now have become quite a big global tech firm and a tech platform. That's quite a massive scale. We have over more than 15 billion trips later. We're still building products to get people closer together and closer to where they want to be. And so we really are now focused at the capacity to try to move anything, whether it's food or things, through cities. And really our goal is to try to be in as many cities as possible to provide that capacity. And in a time as COVID and the pandemic, that's never been proven to be more important. And I'll get to that in just a second. So currently globally, we're present in more than 10,000 cities across 71 countries and 6 continents. Now, when I look at MENA, hopefully many of you would have already used Uber or Kareem in some capacity, but we're present in 7 countries across Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Emirates, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. And within each of those countries, we're actually in quite a few of the cities throughout. So quite distinct from when I was at Google and seeing the power of tech there, where it's quite kind of hovered up. This is actually very much on the ground and in as many cities as you can possibly be in to be able to provide a service to people. Now, obviously, as many companies around the world and many of us experienced, COVID really had just a dramatically different impact and really forced us to have a different perspective. It has a lasting impact on mobility. And in fact, in the early days of COVID, our first mission was to put out a message to tell people not to move, which was so ironic to many people that, the company that tries to get get people, and our mission is to get people to move, telling and putting out a big message to say, please don't move. And, you know, I think that for us, and especially for my work in public policy, the macroeconomic environment and the regulatory trends we saw really just transformed how we are also thinking about ourselves. We really try to flip and learn and adapt our business model to be able to, you know, pivot pretty quickly. And I think that's one of the real game changers for me, seeing the power of what technology can do and how quickly you have the capacity to pivot, to react and support cities in a time of need, as opposed to just kind of keeping going with your mission and your mandate. So at Uber, we really tried to focus on what do our communities need, and what is it that we're going to try to do. And one of the big things we tried to focus on is how do we actually help in terms of making sure that our low-cost products were also providing safe solutions to try to get people where they needed to without creating more of a problem when it came to emboldening the pandemic. So now some of the things that we actually try to focus on are different than our normal business of just, you know, the rides, the classic, you know, one person in one car. We launched things like Uber by the hour. So if people needed to quickly do things and just book a car for an hour to run errands because that was the only space of time that they had to move around their city. Things like Uber Connect was a new path for us, which is trying to move things instead of people. So if people were confined in their homes, a lot of cities, and we actually worked with quite a few governments to make the Uber drivers and other ride sharing companies as well as essential service. And so they were still able to navigate and move around the city and could help people get what they needed at a time when they were more challenged and not being able to move in the same way. Now, the pandemic really allowed us to take a step back, as I mentioned earlier, and really rethink how best can we serve our cities. And our focus for the next few months has been really firmly placed on accelerating recovery, adapting our business to the new normal, and creating additional earning opportunities for drivers, because they were obviously people that were very, very hard hit. But we also saw an uptake in a lot of people that were trying to earn an economic opportunity. Many of us experienced in our cities big layoffs of people, and the fact that there was, as Hazem mentioned, you know, labor rights actually came to the forefront because it was important that we also could communicate with government to show how having flexible platforms where people come in and out when they are in need of an opportunity is so critical. And how do we do that in a way in which these people are protected and the gig economy is not seen as a place that is vulnerable or not useful for people when they're trying to create a flexible opportunity, bridging a gap between jobs or even more full-time. Now, overall, our vision for the Middle East continues to be mobility and becoming the one-stop shop for low-cost transportation and delivery needs. So that actually really does mean that we have to work quite a bit with governments, with other partners like UITP, where we're actually able to really showcase how is the technology able to really transform a city? How do we change the dynamic? I mean, the most basic things and the right to be able to move around in a way that is affordable is a right that everyone should have, because it allows you to do so much and have access to so much. And so how do we do that in a way that is going to really partner with cities? And that should cut across mobility, delivery, and serve as a one-stop shop platform to do that. Again, exactly as Dr. Ayman mentioned, bus. It was actually a really interesting opportunity for us across the Middle East to look at bus. And in fact, our global launch of Uber Bus came out of Egypt. So our CEO came through. I had the privilege of actually working with him on that when I still covered Middle East Africa. And it's a big problem. It's a huge undertaking. It is not an easy mode of transport to take on, but we've actually seen that with Uber Bus, our global teams are able to study the market thoroughly and design a solution that offers affordable transportations for millions of Egyptians. And we're actually learning what we got out of the Uber Bus launch for many other cities around the world in Eastern Europe and Latin America. So I'm incredibly proud as someone who's from the region and having moved kind of across to roles across EMEA to see that one of the biggest bets that we have as a company came out and was really inspired and pushed in the region. Now, also, some of you would have experienced, and I think this is one of the things that I feel that technology can really be a partner in transformative changes that we see in cities around the world, and in particular in Saudi Arabia, when women got the right to drive. Again, this was launched as a first, the women preferred view, which, you know, on the face of it could seem like a very simple thing, but actually has a lot of legalistic and tech challenges to be able to launch a platform in which women drivers can only select women riders, and how you do that is actually quite complex and complicated. And so again, it's one of the things that I'm super inspired that the global tech company is learning from experiences that they're launching first and foremost in the MENA region. And so right now we're actually planning on launching the women preferred view across a number of cities around the world, including the UK and others. And this actually is an opportunity for us to learn from our experience in Saudi Arabia, which we've done in partnership with the government to really incentivize and push women from finding a new mode of an earning opportunity as reform came in. And then finally, we're trying to do our part to support during the COVID pandemic, everything from in the early days launching Uber Medics to get medical and essential workers to hospitals safely and quickly, all the way through to now partnering on how do we actually get people to get to move around their city to get vaccinations. So the work doesn't stop, and we're incredibly excited to continue seeing what we can continue leveraging the tech for in partnership with the cities that we operate in. So that is all from me, and we'll, I'm sure, get back to questions after we're done.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Yes, we'll definitely get back to questions and to a couple of issues that you raised in your presentation. But now I want to move to George, Aoude. George, your work covers a different side of the story. We talked about shared mobility and ride hailing and public transport. But there's also the move towards connected and autonomous transport. So tell us about the work that you're doing at Derq and how you think AI can help us create smarter roads and smarter transportation.
Thank you, Hazem, and I'm happy to be part of the panel tonight. So I have also a few slides. I will walk you through them and tell you more about Derq and the motivation behind what we do. So at Derq, we are powering the future of roads for the safe and efficient movement of road users and autonomous vehicles. What's the motivation? When we look at today's road ecosystem, we still have, unfortunately, more than 1 million people dying every year on the roads. And this is costing the economies trillions of dollars globally. Everyone is focusing on the in-vehicle technologies, and we have autonomous vehicles almost deployed on the roads, but this is not really helping our safety improve over time. And the main reason here is that a road ecosystem includes more than just the vehicles. It also includes the infrastructure, and infrastructure technology is clearly lagging behind. So at Derq, we're focusing on closing that gap in infrastructure technology, and basically it's a big market opportunity. It's a global market opportunity. And talking about autonomous vehicles, to really scale autonomous vehicles, you also need the infrastructure to be ready. And we've been seeing over the last few years that many of the timelines that CEOs for large automotive companies have been sliding because of that. Not just the technology in the vehicle is not ready, really the testing at the scale is not there yet. And we believe autonomous vehicles need also autonomous infrastructure or smart infrastructure for large scaling. So at Derq, our approach is to leverage the existing assets that the cities and road agencies have invested in over the years. So think of the cameras, sensors, radars that you have already deployed. We are providing our intelligence on top of those existing camera feeds. And the deployment, we are doing it either on the edge or on the cloud, so really in a very flexible way. And we're focusing on providing a software platform that takes those existing camera feeds and run in real-time analytics that's powered by AI that help understand all behaviors and dangerous scenarios that you see on the roads, and then also use AI to predict actions. Predict, for example, a crash before it happens. And this allows us to then power a number of solutions. We think of them in two categories: insights, which is solutions that are analysis of what's happening on the roads, where are the dangerous hotspots, and basically providing the customers a way to understand what is happening and being very proactive. And we have another type of solution, which is real-time alerts. And this is really sending alerts in real time to connected and autonomous vehicles that helps today's current cars, or what we call them connected cars, and the future of autonomous cars. We've deployed our technology initially in Dubai. We are Dubai and Detroit based. In 2016, I launched Derq, and then was joined shortly after by my two co-founders, Amr Abu Fadl and Karjan Bart. And today we have two offices in Detroit and in Dubai, and we are growing our deployments across the world. You can see a focus on the US, in the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, and also on the coast with Nevada and California. And as well, we are strengthening our relationships and deploying new pilots around the UAE. And the plan is to really focus on growing the US, which is a big and pioneering market when it comes to connecting autonomous vehicles, as well as support the growth of such technologies in the GCC. We're doing that direct with going to some of the most forward-thinking cities, states, road agencies, as well as with partners that are very important for us to scale and enter new geographies, the likes of Capsh or Denso or Motional. Those are some of the leading mobility players, and we're very proud to be able to call them partners. To illustrate what that future of smart infrastructure will be, I will be sharing here a 1-minute video. It's a demonstration that we've done almost a year ago, or over a year ago now, with 2019, mid-2019, with Capsh. Capsh is a leading traffic player, and they basically provide the hardware, the traffic systems, and they are partnering with us to provide them with the solution, the software that leverages AI to help predict actions, alert drivers in risky situations, specifically here focusing on intersections and the safety for pedestrians and cyclists.
A camera detects pedestrians and cyclists that are on the road but might not be seen by the driver of the vehicle directly. This data is then processed by the Derq brain, and real-time alerts are sent to the driver. In urban areas, there can be plenty of blind spots and obstacles obstructing a driver's view. To avoid an accident in a situation like this, the pedestrian can be detected by the camera and the driver can be alerted real-time before actually seeing the person on the road. Cycling through dense traffic can be very risky, as cyclists can hardly be seen. By alerting the driver of the car early enough that they are able to brake safely, emergency stops can be avoided. Together, Capsh Trafficom and Derq are able to make traffic at intersections safer and more efficient for all road users involved.
So this is just one last word here. Is the infrastructure technology is not here to replace the in-vehicle technologies. We need the latest and most advanced system within the vehicles. We need autonomous vehicles to really improve safety. But the infrastructure technology is an enabler. It will help deploy at scale. It will help improve the safety level to unprecedented levels that will allow the governments, the road agencies be comfortable to deploy such systems at the scale in the future. So I'll pause here, and I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A later on about Derq and our technologies.
Thank you, George. We already actually got a couple of questions for you. I want to remind the audience that they can submit their questions in the Q&A box. As I mentioned in the intro, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on all aspects of life, including transportation, and Joanne has touched on this in her presentation. I want to go back to Ayman. Ayman, can you give us a brief of how public transport authorities have adapted to COVID-19, and how do you see the future of public transport post-COVID? There's been a lot of talk about that.
Thank you, Hazem. So clearly, I mean, the whole sector has been negatively impacted, namely due to movement restrictions. I think Joanne mentioned this a little bit. You know, I mean, we rely on demand coming from economic, social activity, and clearly, when you have movement restrictions, there is no demand on the system. Excuse me. So this created two problems, actually. The first problem is for the operators, they're not generating enough revenues, which means that they are looking at how to deal with the services. And again, here, this is where technology, you know, became very relevant on how they can adjust their operations, you know, change routing, even in dealing with the sanitization and dealing with driver assignment, dealing with tracing cases, et cetera, et cetera. For the government also, it is a huge issue because for two reasons. One is that they want to make sure that they can sustain these major operators because, you know, we believe that once the pandemic is over, if this was a webinar in 2019, you know, we will be talking about traffic congestion, about pollution, about road accidents, and how we should be, you know, moving towards more sustainable mobility, like we did Hazem in so many different occasions before this webinar. But today the reality is a bit different. I am, you know, behind me is Sheikh Zayed Road. I don't know if you can hear the noise, but you know, I mean, the whole scenery is different in terms of traffic density, in terms of people movement. So for the government, it is extremely important how they maintain this, how they maintain these operators, maintain the agenda for sustainable urban mobility. Yet at the same time, with all the pressure on budgets, you know, how do you provide such subsidies, number one? And number two, in the informal sector especially, how do you deal with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of operators? What is a good mechanism? I know, for instance, in some countries, they dealt with them through the social security network, considering them as employees. In other cases, they dealt actually with companies, which means that we are having to revise the business model for how the services are provided, which is quite key, you know, for the whole mobility offer. But indeed, I think technology, especially, and if I use Dubai as an example, we had a webinar where we had the CEO of the public transport agency in Dubai, who said that you know, the best investment they did was in technology because it allowed them all the intelligence that needed about their assets, about their drivers, responding, changing, you know, to the different dynamics. And imagine if you are running 500, 1,000 buses and you have to change the routing. The demand component, as Joanne mentioned, that's extremely important because, you know, knowing where people are, where their needs are, even providing essential services such as getting people to the health facilities, getting people to the testing facilities, getting the frontline workers to their job. I mean, all of this has been done, you know, with technology on the fly. So we, you know, for not both authorities, I think, and operators, this has been somewhat challenging. Yet at the same time, it is actually providing sort of like a re-examination of where we should be, you know, whether it is using technology or changing business models, you know, trying to organize a bit more. I don't know if that answers you, Hazem,
no, very much
of COVID-19. But today, if I may just quickly, I mean, we're a bit different in MENA in the sense that, you know, when I look at markets across the region, the demand is there. And if I use Jordan as an example, Hazem, I always am following up and reading that there is actually more demand than supply. And there's a lot of protests, you know, because the government is requiring 50% capacity, for instance. In Egypt, the demand is almost normal. Dubai is about 85% maybe of normal, and you know, part of it is due to the changing travel behavior. Some people are working from home; they're not as commuting as much. Less tourists maybe. In Morocco, it's the same. You know, the demand is still at the same level. However, when we look to Europe, the demand is actually still in the 40 to 50% range. So, I mean, I say that the region is quite fertile in terms of having demand for public transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayman. I think because of time, maybe it would be better to switch to the gallery view now and just start our discussion. I'll ask some questions from myself and also start bringing in questions from the audience. Maybe going to Joanne. I mean, Joanne, you mentioned the role that Uber and Careem, its subsidiary, have played during the pandemic. And we've certainly, felt that here in Jordan, the deliveries and the role that even Uber played in transporting people to and from the hotels that they were quarantining at early on. But so I want to ask about the policy aspect. And Ayman mentioned earlier that governments in the region aren't keeping up with with the changes happening in transport. You mentioned Uber getting into buses, for example. So this is a new type of service. It's like a hybrid between public transport and something that is individual ride hailing. How do you see governments responding to these new modes of transportation? And also in the context of COVID-19, there's talk that there's going to be maybe more regulation and bigger government post COVID. So what's and we saw that even in for example the recent developments in the UK. So what's your view on that in a couple of minutes, please?
Sure. Actually, I think on the face of it, from the validation of ride sharing in and of itself, I think that many of the MENA governments were far ahead than a lot of other governments around the region. Not obviously, I think there's still a lot that we need to grapple with, but for the most part, I think the fact that there was a bit of a transportation gap in a lot of cases, as in the different infrastructures were not as developed as you see in maybe other parts of Western Europe, it allowed for them to leapfrog almost into how they actually can leverage technology. And so in some aspects, we did see that the opening for the regulation was fast moving. I think now as we start to, the validation of ride sharing and technology is almost is done, and that these players are here to stay, and governments themselves are also moving in this direction. There are question marks in terms of how do we actually then, really create a pathway for them to really grow and continue to create investment. And so I do think that we're going to hit up a new challenge when it comes to things like data and how we think about data and the cross balance between data and privacy, and then fees and operational costs of how a lot of these different tech players, and how do you consider them? Are they transport companies? Are they tech companies? And I think that's something that is very much a live conversation. And to your point on the UK, I think that starts to move into a third area, which is how do you also start thinking about the people that leverage these platforms? How do we make sure that in a world in which this, Uber is the poster child for gig work, but it's not an Uber per se only issue. It is an issue that cuts across as we completely change the way that people think about work in the traditional way, and how people earn a living and how people fill gaps. And so I think what the UK showed us is that there is definitely initially a lack of clarity from what the different labor segments look like, and the courts are trying to create some of that clarity. And I think that the real push for us now is how to make sure that these things are applied across industry, so it doesn't just impact one company and not another. And so I think for us, we've made this very clear, is that we don't believe there needs to be a trade-off between giving individuals the capacity to earn a living flexibly that fits in terms of their lifestyle based on what they need. Sometimes, people need different flexibilities for different reasons, either between jobs, either because they don't want to work full time, either because they have family needs that they need to adhere to, but not at the expense of getting protection. And yet, unfortunately, the labor courts aren't structured in which you are given the capacity to offer benefits but not be considered an employer. And I think there's a lot that there's to move into. So I think that is a separate space that is more prevalent in Europe currently than we see it in MENA, mostly because I think the conversation around labor is still being had, and the dynamics are a little bit different, but I think it will emerge, especially in places like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. So very complex answer, but hopefully I got to the heart of what you were looking for.
Very clear. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to move to some questions we got from the audience to George. We have a couple of questions. One from Dana Dabousi, our fellow board member at MIT AAA. Thank you for sharing your inspiring work on Derq. Does your AI focus on unsafe driving and practices that we commonly see in the region, like driving in the shoulder or tailgating? And another question from Alauddin Atiyeh. Did you measure the effectiveness of your interventions? I'm curious to see some tangible statistics on the efficiency and accuracy of AI prediction models.
The first question is, can you repeat? Is it do we cover?
Basically, it's gone, I think. But it's about do you address basically or are able to detect unsafe driving practices or behaviors that are common in our region?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first question first. So we do actually focus on errant driving or dangerous driving, part of the system. So we, if you think of what we're trying to do, we are trying to understand all behaviors on the roads and trying to detect and predict dangerous behaviors before they happen. So one of them is running a red light. If you're able to basically watch the behaviors of driving, you're able a few seconds in advance to know when someone is about to run a red light, and then you can share this information with connected vehicles. Another dangerous driving or dangerous behaviors is jaywalking or some pedestrian crossing the roads when they're not supposed to cross the roads. So depending on the geographies, depending on actually the cities where we're deploying, different types of dangerous behaviors are observed, and the system, because we control the systems, because we develop the software and the AI, we are able to add new features, new basically maneuvers or new behaviors, and adjust for the needs of the customer. So in the UAE, running red lights is a common one. Speeding is another one. So yeah, we are able to basically detect any behaviors that the cameras or the sensors can see, and then we adjust the systems accordingly. For the second question regarding the performance, it's a great question. I spent a few years of my life proving that at MIT. So definitely performance is needed to be able to deploy live with the customers, with the partners. And the way we're able to, we measure performance, and it really depends on the applications, depend on the geographies, but usually our performance is to maximize what we call the accuracy or the true positives while minimizing the false warnings. And with AI, with our own patented way of doing things, we're able to achieve above 90%, in many cases above 95% accuracy, while keeping false positive to the required levels. So that's a great question, and definitely it's the first question that usually the customer asks for.
Does it work? Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you, George. We have a couple of more questions from the audience. Maybe this one could go to Ayman. It's from Marcus, who's a graduate of course 4 and 11 at MIT and a member of the Media Lab. He's asking about the relationship between mobility, transportation, and land use. And I'm trying to paraphrase here, but basically what is being done to change land use strategies in the region, which are mostly based on antiquated auto-centric urban planning models from the 60s, and how does that impact the development of public transport in the region?
Excellent question. I mean, this is really, I mean, the key challenge, I think, in MENA is that many of our cities are so organic, and they adopted some model, like Marcus said, in the 60s or 70s, and unfortunately, to mimic growth or development, we copied some models without really relating it to the city itself. So for instance, Amman wanted to be Dubai at some point in time, and we see the results. And we didn't really preserve, the characteristics of the city. And again, sorry to use Dubai as an example, but I think with the Dubai Metro implementation in 2009, a lot of people were actually betting that this is not going to work. And, you know, I remember I went through Dubai when I was still in the US. I was traveling for a conference, and you know, I saw the construction for the metro. I'm like, oh my God, you know, how is this going to work? You know, the connectivity, the land use. And today, I think it's a very good example for the region. So without this connectivity, without this connection, we will not be able, and I'm sorry, you know, to both my colleagues, Joanne and George, with all the technology, you will not be able to move thousands and thousands of people during peak hour. I mean, everything helps. It will all be integrated at some point, but you still need the mass transit component. And for that, you need to have the proper configuration for the city, the territorial configuration. So we see some success. Like I said, you know, Dubai is a good example, but still, you know, once you're off the main metro corridor, then the service is different totally. We are seeing actually Hazem maybe involved in you know, some efforts in Amman, where, you know, the municipality is rethinking, and this is because of the pandemic. You know, one of the things that the pandemic, by the way, did in the Arab world is that it actually encouraged people or forced people to walk, you know, for the first time. So I mean, that by itself, there's a sense of discovery and also more demand about having some of the essential services within a walking distance. And I hope that this argument is sustained. We see more, I guess, more success in Maghreb. There's more like the French model, if I may use that term. So you see more density. You see, you know, the old Medina. You see neighborhoods that can thrive. Sorry, long answer, but I think this is one of the key challenges today in Riyadh, for instance. You know, where they cannot change the layout of the city, but they still want people to use the metro.
Maybe can I just add something here? I think
go ahead, I can add this before, Joanne. I mean, because I want you to respond to that on how also Uber is integrating with public transport, and maybe just add another related question from someone in the audience on walking and biking and how they're you know, the most sustainable. How is Uber also getting into not just integrating with public transport, but also micro mobility, you know, such as cycling and your scooters? Yeah.
Very, very fair. I think when it comes to Dr. Ayman's point, it's spot on. You know, I don't see, Uber doesn't see itself replacing public transport, but actually being a complementer. And so no one system can do it all. And I think for cities to really efficiently move around and for us to really tackle congestion in a true mode, we need to be able to leverage technology to get people to actually use public transport. So we have things like Uber Transit, which we've done in places like Dallas or other cities in Europe, where, you know, you can actually look for the closest public transit spot and then also be able to then hop into an Uber when it goes into the desert, the rural areas, I would say. So I think spot on that you know, sometimes in city centers the best mode is to walk, to take a bike, or if it's, you know, a certain time of day, you may choose to hop in an Uber. But I think it's that how do those things all come together to create a seamless movement? In terms of bike and walking, obviously, I think walking is always great, and we're not going to probably come up with a solution to tackle that. But you know, a lot of times I think in big cities, you know, there's not always an option to be able to walk. So that's something that I guess whether it's public transport or taking an Uber is definitely an option. I think when many of you may have known that we had a product called Jump Bikes, which were jumps bikes and scooters. We have actually really made a big focus to showing how we can invest in companies that do these things, as opposed to necessarily always having to run them ourselves. And so I think the real importance for Uber is that we are a platform that can actually try to, we don't have to do it just all ourselves. And so actually in some cities you can turn on the app. We invested into Lime. So a lot of our Jump business went into the company called Lime, which we have stake in. And so if you go into London, for example, you'll still be able to actually pick the different mode that you want. You may get on a scooter, a bike, as long as it exists in that city. So for us, fully agreed with the person who asked the question that yes, there are many days have different needs. For shorter distances, you may take a scooter. For a longer distance, you may take a bike. For a city center, you may take public transport. So the complementarity matters.
Thank you, Joanne. I want to move back to George. There's a question from Salman. He's asking, what are the main obstacles you have run into while trying to scale Derq? Have they varied significantly across regions or continents? And also related to that, Alauddin is asking about whether these what you're doing has been adopted in the road safety strategies and action plans for municipalities and authorities like in Dubai.
So in terms of scaling, what we are developing at Derq, or what we've been developing the last few years, is advanced technology. So typically, it goes through phases. Right now, it's in the pilot phase. So we are, especially for our connected vehicle solutions, we are piloting in the number of cities and states in the US. I mentioned Michigan, Ohio, in Nevada as well. In the UAE, we're working with the Dubai, Smart Dubai office, RTA in Dubai Silicon Oasis. So we are in a pilot phase, and the entire industry in a pilot phase. And the reason it's in pilot phase is that the technology has been proven, but now a lot of it is how to integrate with existing infrastructure, how to really build the ecosystem around it. And it will take probably another 2 to 3 years to start seeing these pilot scale. We are starting to see this ourselves at Derq. We initially were deploying on a few intersections. We still call them pilot or some sort of POCs now, or proof of concept. Now we're going to pilots in that not are only on a few intersections. We are now going to corridor deployments. So we just were awarded a 65 intersection deployment in Michigan, and this is really showing the scale of how Michigan and others will follow. It's not going to be everywhere immediately. We're going to go into corridors, and then eventually, as those corridors scale, which corridors are the main roads basically, you start having city scale deployments. So what will really help this scaling is, one, having more cities and states really open to testing and piloting these technologies. Another main factor is also having the funding that needs to come to accelerate those initiatives. And infrastructure investment has always been a question in our industry. Who's funding it? Is it the government? Is it private sector? And obviously, there is probably somewhere in between. You see those public-private partnerships appearing more and more, especially in our field. And you're also seeing in parallel big infrastructure spending. Recently in the US, with the new administration, a big focus is on infrastructure for many reasons, including reopening the economy, job creation, as well as the importance of infrastructure to really drive value and drive really the US specifically in that case, but also other economies to the forefront of this digital basically transformation of our cities. So there is to summarize, there is a technology validation and piloting that's going through, but then there is also a funding and alignment between the private and public sector that we need more of it.
Yeah, thank you, George. I mentioned that people say that the future of mobility is autonomous, connected, shared, and electric, and we've talked about all of those except maybe the electric part. And we have a question here, maybe to Ayman and to Joanne. How does a pioneering city in mobility like Dubai deal with the tensions between EVs and the cheap conventional travel modes? Maybe to Ayman specifically on Dubai, and to Joanne generally, just how Uber views e-mobility and electric mobility in general. We can start with Ayman.
Thank you, Hazem, and thank you, Ali. I guess I'm not sure I want to use tension. But I mean, this is a really important policy question, is if I have a road or space actually before a road, how am I using it? And if I have a road with so many lanes, how am I using these lanes? So, we prefer in UITP that, at least one lane goes to public transportation where you're carrying a lot of people. Then another lane could go to, shared mobility, people who are sharing a vehicle, and then, something high priority for electric vehicles. So I think in the region we have a couple of notions for electrification. at the institutional level, there's still a lot of issues about this not being mature technology. So I mean, whether true or not, but at the very least, the policy that regulates even renewable energy, because eventually, you have to look at how the electricity is provided. We did a very small experiment in Amman before I left in 2016 with less than 50 electric taxis, and it was very challenging, to deal with the policy, the regulation, the infrastructure for the charging, training the drivers, all of this stuff. So in Dubai specifically, I think, you have DEWA, you have the city vision, and then you have all this infrastructure. So at this point, there isn't really enough concentration or critical mass of electric vehicles. But I think the city is leading in terms of having the vision and providing the charging infrastructure for free at this point, and making sure that you have this integration, that you can actually charge your vehicle where you can have opportunity charging. Dubai Taxi, for instance, which operates under Hala, also has the option to get an electric vehicle. So I mean, I think it's positive so far, but there isn't really a large-scale deployment that's creating issues at this point, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ayman. And Joanne, before you talk about electrification, I just want to add another question for you for the sake of time. We have a question from Hashim Dabbas. How do you manage long-term planning in markets where policymakers and therefore policy direction changes frequently? In my home country of Jordan, we have a new minister of transport every couple of months. So
I once experienced, I think, 3 ministers of transport in a month. So I definitely understand that. Maybe I'll tackle the second one first, and then I'll get to the first. It's challenging. It's not easy because a big part of actually trying to do some good policy making is to have spend time with the policymakers to really get them to have dialogue about the complex issues. The issues are not easy or simple. So I do think that is quite a challenge, but one that we've been tackling for quite some time. And I think it's also making sure that your stakeholders are varied and that you're not just talking to 1 or 2 individuals, but really showcasing the value that you can bring to a city in the long term through a number of different allies. And so we've seen that even in Egypt, when there was a lot of changes, we didn't just interact with the Minister of Transport, but we were spending time with the Minister of Investment, with the Prime Minister's office, and also third parties. So it's not easy. But you have to have grit, tenacity, and just always spread your wings as much as possible. On the electrification, I know we're getting close to time, but it's something that's incredibly important to us at Uber, and it's a huge global priority for us. We actually launched something called the Spark Report. Last year, our CEO announced it. It was a global announcement of commitments that we're going to make from a sustainability point of view. In particular, when it looks currently it's focused on Europe, but we're extending that over to Middle East and Africa. But things like getting to 50% electric kilometers that we've committed to across 7 cities, reporting on CO2 emissions, and then partnering with cities that are opening up for enabling environment for electrification to take place, for us to be able to get to 100% electric within 5 years. So really, I think then the next mission is for us to find cities that are creating the enabling environments for us to do that. And some of that includes whether it's enabling regulations, working to make sure that there is enough charging infrastructure, as Dr. Ayman mentioned, but also that the charging infrastructure is not just in dense city centers, but actually further out where people may actually be able to charge within a neighborhood. And then finally, regulations. I think we're still seeing outdated regulations across, this is not just exclusive to the MENA region, across the world, that don't create the enabling environment for either affordable electric vehicles to come through the market, a secondhand market of electric vehicles to come through, but also, we have things like return to garage in places like Germany and Italy, where literally a driver who is working on a platform like Uber or other ride-sharing companies will have to basically spend half of their trips empty to return to a base. This is an old model of taxi system. So I think it's the combination of really an openness and a real dedication to it, which means that you tackle it on a number of fronts. But we're definitely, it's a huge global priority for us as a company.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm sorry I won't be able to get to all of the questions. We are run out of time, and I want to take this opportunity to thank our three panelists, Ayman, Joanne, and George, for their valuable insights and contributions. I want to thank my colleagues at the MIT AAA board for helping me, for helping put this together, and Mace for helping behind the scenes, filtering the questions, and Moana Benton and Emily Taylor from the MIT Alumni Association for setting up this webinar. Finally, I want to thank everyone here for attending the webinar and for submitting all your questions. And I look forward to seeing you all at our future events. Hope you all stay positive and test negative, and take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Hazem. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Hazem.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.